Some cities grow and others sprawl. Some expand their territory as if space were infinite, as if each new neighborhood could be built without consequences. But urban space is never infinite. Every kilometer of asphalt comes at a cost, in time, in money, in quality of life. Today we're going to explore 8 cities that made such questionable urban planning decisions that they ended up trapped by their own mistakes. Cities where the car reigns supreme, where public transportation is a pipe dream, and where daily life becomes an endless journey between disconnected points. 1. Brisbane. Brisbane is the capital of Queensland, Australia. A prosperous, sunny city with a meandering river running through its center. But Brisbane is also a lesson in how 30 years of planning can produce almost nothing. The city sprawls across more than 2,300 square kilometers, an area larger than Berlin, yet with less than a third of its population. The problem isn't just the size, it's how that size has been managed. Brisbane is fragmented by hills and the Brisbane River itself, which divides the city into disconnected sections. Bridges should be the solution, but Brisbane has only a handful of functional crossings. The Story Bridge and the Gateway Bridge carry most of the north-south traffic, creating permanent bottlenecks. The construction of new bridges has been debated for decades, but progress is illogical. Public transport reflects this disconnect. The City Cat, the ferry that crosses the river, appears on every tourist postcard, but it's slower than walking and more expensive than driving. The bus network is the backbone of the transport system, which speaks volumes about Brisbane's urban priorities. There's a busway system, dedicated bus lanes, that carries more passengers than the rail network. Why? Because successive governments failed to agree on expanding the rail network. The rail link to the airport opened in 2001. Brisbane, a major city since 1842, waited until the 21st century for a train to the airport. Meanwhile, entire suburbs like Springfield and Ripley sprang up 40 kilometers from the city center, with no rail connection planned until 2030. The so-called Brisbane Metro isn't really a metro. It's a rebranded bus system, a form of infrastructural window dressing that solves nothing. And then there's the weather. Brisbane has a subtropical climate with sweltering summers that can exceed 35 degrees Celsius. Walking in that sun is a test of endurance. Yet new urban developments lack shade trees or covered walkways. The city builds as if the heat doesn't exist. And it builds in flood-prone areas, ignoring the lessons of the major floods of 2011 and 2022. The river that defines Brisbane also threatens it, but development continues as if remembering were optional. 2. Charlotte. Charlotte, North Carolina, is a city of banks and skyscrapers. It is the second largest financial center in the United States after New York. But Charlotte is also a city that demolished its own streetcar system in 1938 and spent 70 years regretting it. The city covers more than 800 square kilometers, with a lower density than many American suburbs. The center, called Uptown, is filled with gleaming corporate towers that empty out after 6 p.m. Nobody lives there. Charlotte was designed as a ring city, the center for work, the suburbs for living. The result is an urban donut with no filling. The light rail system has 2 lines that barely cover 20% of the metropolitan area. The blue line runs north-south, which doesn't help anyone who needs to travel east-west. Construction on the Silver Line began in 2017 with a promised completion date of 2030. 13 years to build a single light rail line. Meanwhile, the average Charlotte resident spends $13,000 a year on transportation because the city was built around mandatory car ownership. Neighborhoods like Ballantyne are 30 kilometers from downtown, with no public transportation connection. The bus system has suffered repeated cuts, leaving low-income residents with no options, while the city continues to build luxury apartments uptown. Independence Boulevard was slated to receive a light rail line, but it ended up being converted into a freeway expansion project. Now they're building River District, a massive development with no access to public transportation, guaranteeing another 20,000 daily car trips. Housing costs in Charlotte are skyrocketing, but the city continues to build suburban sprawl that requires expensive infrastructure. Charlotte spends millions attracting businesses downtown while making it impossible for workers to get there without a car. 3. Jacksonville. Jacksonville is the largest city in the United States by area, 840 square miles. That's more land than Los Angeles and New York combined, but with only 1/10 of their population. Jacksonville uses every inch of that space to expand in the most inefficient way possible. The city consolidation of 1968 was designed to create efficiency, but it ended up encouraging endless sprawl. Downtown empties out after the workday as if an apocalypse had occurred. The Skyway, an automated people mover, covers 8 blocks, making it arguably the most useless transit system in the United States. The JTA bus system runs once an hour, if that. Communities like Durban Park are 40 kilometers from downtown, with no public transportation plan. The city continues to annex land and build suburbs while existing neighborhoods deteriorate. Arlington has 1960s infrastructure serving a 2024 population. The solution to the traffic is to widen Interstate 295, adding lanes to a bypass that encircles 100 kilometers of sprawling city. Jacksonville serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when territorial expansion replaces urban growth. It's a city that confused size with importance, sprawling territory with progress. And the result is a hollow metropolis where distances make daily life a constant logistical challenge. 4. Dallas. Dallas demolished every historic neighborhood and replaced them with parking craters. This Texas sprawl covers 880 square kilometers, making it larger than New York City despite having only a third of its population. Downtown Dallas has an impressive skyline, but zero activity on the streets. They built Clyde Warren Park over a freeway, creating a vital public space to draw people downtown. But the damage was already done. The DART light rail serves park and ride commuters, not the neighborhoods. The system has the longest average commute distance in the United States because everyone lives within 40 kilometers of their job. Neighborhoods like Frisco require a 90-minute commute to downtown. The North Dallas Turnpike costs residents $15 a day to get to work. The southern parts of the city have been neglected for decades, lacking grocery stores and public transportation, while the northern areas receive every convenience. The Trinity River was meant to be Dallas's waterfront promenade, but it remains an empty floodplain. Massive developments like Legacy West are being built in the suburbs while downtown struggles to survive. Housing costs in Dallas rival those of coastal cities despite being situated on seemingly endless flat land because expansion is expensive and someone has to pay for all that scattered infrastructure. Dallas is just one example of how unplanned growth can become an urban trap. But it's not the only one. If this analysis is making you think differently about cities, like it so more people can discover how urban design affects our daily lives. And subscribe, because there are still more cities to explore. 5. Kansas City. Kansas City sits on the border of two states and uses that as an excuse for terrible planning. This Midwestern sprawl spans 840 square kilometers between Kansas and Missouri, with no coordination between the two sides. The city demolished its streetcar system in 1957 and built freeways through established neighborhoods, creating permanent divisions. The city center has a free streetcar that covers 2 miles, making it a tourist attraction rather than a means of transportation. Metrobus service was recently cut by 25%, leaving low-income residents without service while suburban development is subsidized. The Kansas and Missouri sides have separate, competing planning departments. Businesses are playing both states to obtain subsidies while residents pay for the duplication of infrastructure. Stadiums are 15 kilometers from the city center because the city prioritized parking over accessibility. Communities like Olathe are 40 kilometers from the center without public transportation. The solution is to widen I-435, the 80-mile bypass. Kansas City spends millions revitalizing its downtown while building suburbs that perpetuate car dependency. The city has more lane miles per capita than almost anywhere else, but traffic worsens every year because the induced demand is real. 6. Calgary. Calgary, way in Alberta, Canada, is a city of office towers and vast suburban sprawl. It is the center of the Canadian oil industry, a city that grew rapidly during the oil booms and never learned to grow sustainably. The city covers more than 850 square kilometers, with an urban density that makes even American cities seem compact. The C-Train light rail system is respectable compared to other North American cities, but it remains inadequate. The lines extend into distant suburbs, but the neighborhoods in between are left disconnected. Calgary built outwards, not upwards. Residential developments are increasingly relocating from the city center, creating bedroom communities that are entirely dependent on cars. The weather doesn't help. Winters are brutal, with temperatures plummeting well below freezing. Walking or waiting for the bus in January is an act of survival. The city has tried to encourage medium-density development in recent years, but faces fierce resistance from suburban residents who fear change. Meanwhile, the aging infrastructure of the city center needs renovation, but money continues to flow into peripheral expansion. Calgary is a city caught between its oil identity and the need to reinvent itself for a less carbon-dependent future. So far, oil is winning. 7. Johannesburg. Johannesburg is South Africa's largest city and the country's economic engine. But it is also a city deeply scarred by apartheid, a system of racial segregation that designed the city to separate, control, and exclude. Black residential areas were pushed to the outskirts during apartheid, far from the employment opportunities concentrated in the city center and north. Soweto, the most famous township, is more than 20 kilometers from downtown Johannesburg. This pattern of spatial segregation was never truly corrected. 3 decades after the end of apartheid, Johannesburg remains a divided city. Public transport is chaotic. Shared taxis and informally operated minibuses move millions of people daily, but they are neither regulated nor integrated into a coherent system. The Gautrain, a modern high-speed train, connects Johannesburg with Pretoria and the airport, but its fares are prohibitive for most South Africans. It is a luxury in a country where the average income is low. Highways divide the city into fragments. Johannesburg's once vibrant city center has deteriorated. Many buildings are abandoned or informally occupied. Businesses and wealthy residents have moved north to areas like Sandton, creating a second urban center that functions as a bastion of wealth. Johannesburg is a city of walls. Almost every property has high fences, barbed wire, and private security. Inequality is starkly and visibly evident in the urban landscape, and transportation, or the lack thereof, perpetuates that inequality, making opportunities inaccessible to those who need them most. 8. Cairo. Cairo is one of the oldest and largest cities in the world. It is the heart of Egypt, a metropolis of more than 20 million inhabitants. But Cairo is also a monumental urban chaos, a city that grew without a plan, without regulation, and almost without control. Traffic in Cairo is legendary. The highways are perpetually congested. Traffic lights are mere suggestions. Lanes are a flexible concept. Driving in Cairo is an exercise in extreme patience or utter recklessness, depending on your perspective. The city has a metro system, one of the few in Africa, but it's insufficient for such a massive population. Much of Cairo's urban growth has been informal. Neighborhoods are built without permits, planning, or basic infrastructure. Dwellings are stacked one on top of the other, creating precarious structures that defy the laws of engineering. The streets are narrow, winding, and unsuitable for modern traffic. And then there's the pollution. Cairo has some of the most polluted air in the world. Toxic smog regularly blankets the city. A mixture of vehicle emissions, desert dust, and the burning of agricultural waste on the outskirts. Breathing in Cairo is an act of resistance. The Egyptian government has attempted drastic solutions. They are building a new administrative capital 50 kilometers east of Cairo, a city planned from scratch with wide avenues and monumental government buildings. But this new capital does not solve the problems of the 20 million people who live in Cairo today. It is an escape, not a solution. Cairo is a city of stark contrasts: antiquity and modernity, wealth and poverty, planning and chaos. It is a city that functions despite itself, sustained more by the resilience of its inhabitants than by the quality of its urban design. These 8 cities tell different stories, but they all share a common thread: planning decisions that prioritized expansion over quality, cars over people, and short-term thinking over the future. Each one serves as a reminder that cities are not inevitable. They are the result of choices, political, economic, and social. And these choices have consequences. When a city is designed for cars, it becomes hostile to pedestrians. When it expands outward without limits, its identity is diluted and its infrastructure becomes more expensive. When public transportation is ignored, millions are condemned to car dependency and inequality of opportunity. But here's the good news: cities can change. Brisbane can build those bridges. Charlotte can expand its light rail. Johannesburg can integrate its transport system. None of these cities are doomed forever. Urban planning is an ongoing process, and each generation has the opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past. The next time you walk, drive, or wait for a bus in your own city, ask yourself, who was this city designed for? And who could it be designed for? If this tour of the world's worst designed cities made you reflect on your own urban environment, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. There's much more to explore about how we live, how we move, and how we build the spaces we inhabit.